Are you ready to break into the world of commercial acting? Slate It Till You Make It is the only podcast exclusively dedicated to helping you thrive in this dynamic and unpredictable industry. With thousands of talented actors vying for a single role, how can you increase your chances of becoming that one standout audition? Join your host, Catherine Donnelly, as she interviews the top commercial casting directors, industry experts, and working actors. Slate It Till You Make It is your ultimate resource for insider tips, strategies, and stories that will help you step up your commercial game. Subscribe now and never miss an episode. Get ready to unlock your true potential in the competitive world of commercial acting. Slate It Till You Make It. Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the one-stop shop for actors and creators both above and below the line. I am your host, Vinny Mancuso, Backstage Senior Editor and Professional Entertainment Obsessive. I'll be your guide through every corner of the creative industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. Here you'll find intimate, in-depth talks with today's most award-worthy names in film, television, and theater. Along the way, we'll get advice on living your best creative life, relatable stories of the highest highs and lowest lows, and maybe, just maybe, a rare peek in the envelope.
To be honest, I can't create a performance until I'm there and you feel what's in the air and the other actors in front of you, and you can have all your ideas and do your prep and conversations, but until you're there and you're in it, you don't know. And then even after that, you're like, I'm often like, oh, that's what it was about,
Welcome to another episode of In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. I am your host, Backstage Senior Editor Vinny Mancuso, and joining us today is the truly wonderful Rose Byrne. Now, right up top, I do want to say, to be clear, that this interview was recorded before SAG-AFTRA went on strike in order to get a better contract with the AMPTP. Rose has been vocal in supporting the strike, and she's not crossing any lines here. And I'm so glad we did get this conversation in time, because it's a great, great talk about one of the most eclectic acting careers of the past 10 years and beyond, honestly. Rose has a very busy 2023 with 2 TV series and a film. And mostly we talked about all of the ups and downs and the, let's say, healthy uncertainty she has about her career, even after all these years, that keeps her career and her talents constantly evolving. Let's just get right into it. Here is Rose Byrne. Rose, how's it going? It is a absolute pleasure to meet you. I'm so excited you're here. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing? How's everything in your life right now?
I'm okay. I just came in from Australia yesterday, so I'm a little bit jet lagged.
Oof.
And I also got food poisoning on the plane.
Oh no. Well, double thank you for being here.
No, but so I'm fine. But I'm fine. I feel a lot better today. But yeah, it's so hot in New York. Are you in New York?
I am in New York.
Hot.
Yeah, it's a swamp. It is a swamp in New York City right now.
It's not good to be out in the day. So I'm very happy to be inside with the aircon.
Yeah, I can't imagine the combination of 13-hour flight, food poisoning, swampy New York has been wonderful for you.
20-hour flight.
20-hour flight. Okay, double it, I guess.
It's 14 hours from Sydney to LA, and then it's LA to New York.
Well, thank you. So I'm going to keep thanking you for being here, because that is
okay. I appreciate it. I know I'm milking it.
But how, this is a very interesting time for Hollywood. It's a very interesting time to be an actor. This will be coming out on, I believe, the 20th.
Yep.
So who knows where Hollywood will be.
I know. Point. Where will it be? It is such an interesting time and long overdue. Really, these contracts need to be redrawn up, and it's time, but it's not without hardship for people. My goodness,
Yeah.
it's not straightforward.
No, I mean, we were just talking before you came on. It's just, it's all that anybody connected to the industry is, thinking about us at Backstage. We are for the actors. We want people to be acting. We want people to be working. So I just, it's, we'll see where we are when this episode comes out. So we won't belabor the point too much.
It's a tough time.
But we should talk about acting and you being an actor. And I wanted to go all the way back to the beginning and ask if you have any sort of acting origin story, anything that happened in your life where you saw a performance, anything where acting crystallized for you, and you said that's maybe something I would like to do.
Well, as a family, we used to all watch, one of the few shows we'd sit around and watch was Fawlty Towers with John Cleese, the classic comedy from the 70s, I think it is, right? It's pretty old. And I don't think I knew exactly at the time, but John Cleese's performance just stayed with me, and the comedic timing and the brilliance and the physical comedy he did, and us as a family, really, it's just that collective kind of joy that it would bring, and how funny and ridiculous it was. And I don't know if it has always been in my subconscious, but it's a very deep sense memory that I have of, and I think in some ways has stayed with me, particularly in terms of comedy. So that's a little bit of an origin story. And in terms of actually starting acting, I grew up in Balmain in a city suburb in Sydney, and a friend of my sister's who was a lot older, 10 years older than me, said, I think you'd really like acting. I go to this place called the Australian Theatre for Young People, which is a youth acting program in Sydney that I actually was the ambassador for many years. And I went and started classes there with a bunch of kids from my neighbourhood. We'd get the ferry over because it was down in the rocks in Sydney. And I loved it. And that's where I began, and just loved it. I didn't know if you could make a living or how you could. I watched some TV, but I wasn't from a family that was in the business by any means, and none of my friends were. And then a casting agent came to one of my classes there, and then she pulled me out to audition for this Australian feature film called Dallas Doll, a sort of strange, wonderful little eccentric film. And I ended up getting the part as one of the kids in the movie. So that's a brief overview of a long answer to your question.
Can you remember the sort of first performance, like the first time that you did acting? I would even say officially, but can you remember, the first time you were either on stage in front of a camera and said a line, and that was, the beginning of it all, and what that was for you?
I remember playing Mary Poppins in year 3 or something like that, or year 2, like I was really little. And I remember that very clearly. And my best friend Lucy Buchanan played Bert. She had on a fake beard and and I loved it. I just loved it. I remember that. And I remember playing dress-ups with my sisters. I'm the youngest of 4 kids, so they would always dress me up and we'd do shows together and stuff like that. And then I remember when this casting agent came in, and I remember my first audition going into Liz Mullen's casting and being in front of the camera and all those, amazing kind of memories. The first time of being in that world, and it's very vivid.
What do you, that first audition, I can imagine, is, it's like stepping into Oz. It's a completely different, what was, at the time, what did you think acting was? When you're first sort of, you're doing this for the first time, you don't quite have the bedrock of process or technique or anything. During these first things, what was acting to you?
During the first things, it was in a way a similar thing of like, obviously no technique, like technical technique and all those sorts of things, and acting technique, fine tuning things, but a very intuitive and instinctual. But the stepping into the auditioning and camera and stuff, that really, as you put it really well, it was kind of like going to Oz. It was such a different world and very daunting and intimidating and exciting. Like anticipation and will you, won't you get it? And it felt very out of my league. I didn't know how it worked, and it felt very like foreign in an exciting way, in a way that was like something to strive for. But I still, I remember feeling very daunted and intimidated by the casting agents and the learning the scripts and being on camera and the lights and all the smells and sounds. It's really cool to think back about it.
There's just so many people in an audition room. I
Yeah,
don't think people realize how many people are looking at you, how many lights there are. I
I
think is
know. It's really kind of wondrous and daunting at the same time.
so. When did the sort of ground get a little bit more solid under your feet? Like, do you remember when it became less of, oh, I'm doing this new thing, and more of, this is who I am? Like when was the first time you sort of felt confident in where you were, basically?
I don't know if I've ever arrived there, to be honest. I think I've been around for a long time, so there's some kind of comfort of like I've just been, there's less. But that feeling of I continued school. I would audition. I got parts here and there. Then I really did want to go to drama school, but I didn't get in, so I was shattered. I was like, that was my path. I was going to get into NIDA or WAP or VCS something, and didn't get into any of them because my auditions were probably terrible. And so my parents really encouraged me to go to university and get a degree, an arts degree anyway. So I did, went to Sydney University, but I continued to work and audition, and then really started pursuing it more honestly in my early 20s. And I went and studied at the Atlantic Theatre Company, David Mamet School, and really fell in love with that technique. And, did that classic thing of kind of going back and forth between LA and Sydney and auditioning and trying to get jobs and all that sort of thing. So, and back then there were a few Australians, but now there's like an Australian on every corner. It's like you used to sort of,
there's that 20-hour flight.
I know, right? So that was kind of my, probably in earnest really began to try to pursue it in my like late teens, early 20s. Yeah.
I'm curious, and, not to dwell on the negative memories of your past, but the moment you did not get into drama school, that's such a we talk a lot about the successful things, the very crowning moments in people's career, but when you did not get in, what was the immediate reaction, and then what was the pivot into, well, I'm gonna keep trying. It didn't stick.
Well, at the time, it was really consuming and very vivid, and I was very disappointed. I was shattered and felt knocked about, my confidence knocked about. And but it's good. You're young, you're resilient, and you have to you got nothing but time at that point if you're lucky. So I was, my parents really encouraged me to just like, if you've got the opportunity to go to university, then do it. You can continue to grow and learn. And I'm really glad I did, because I loved uni and I really enjoyed it more than I thought I would, the freedom of university, and made new friends. And I guess my driving ambition to continue to work, I had an agent, I could audition. So I just continued on that path. And the theatre was also always more elusive to me, because that felt really exclusively to people who had trained, particularly in Australia at that point. So I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to get into the theatres in Sydney and in Melbourne and so on. And so that was it felt so out of reach to me, and like I would never be qualified. But, I was lucky. I had a couple of directors take a chance on me, and I could audition, and I did eventually do a play. But that was always on a pedestal to me, was the theatre actors who had trained. Like I felt very daunted and in awe of those people.
Is there a role or a project during this sort of early time, this time that you were figuring it out, and these directors were taking a chance on you? Is there anything that you think most shaped who you are as an actor, and who you are as an actor still to this day?
Well, so this technique, practical aesthetics, which was taught, started at the Atlantic Theatre Company with Mamet and Felicity Huffman and Bill Macy and all those guys. I did a TV show called Wildside in Australia, and they used that technique. And there was a wonderful dramaturg called Nico Lathoris, and he was very influential in terms of technique and approach that they used there. And for me, as a young actor at that point, I became very committed to that technique. And I think I still carry that with me for sure. I still carry his teachings, and I find it very grounding, because it's very sort of demystifying technique. It's very, just when there's so much going on in text and performance or context of a project, whether it's a play or a movie. And I find that technique really just strips it back to the basics, which sometimes I find very helpful when you're approaching something daunting.
What are the I know that there are so many techniques.
I know it's very writer based. It's sort of like it can be a little dry, but it's like there's no character. It's just words on a page. It's very it's Meisner based, so it's very acting is reacting, and it's sort of reactionary to the latest Stanislavski, Lee Strasberg school. It's like a bit of reactionary to that, so it's very stripped back. And I was drawn to that. I think for me at that time, I really enjoyed it, and now I think I'm more into like being more creative with character and the choices you can do with physicality and stuff like that. But for me, it's always been a grounding kind of thing to return to.
And it sounds like it's a good way in, because it
definitely is. Yeah, I think because it can help you just declutter it.
I think part of one of the biggest shocks of working at Backstage for as long as I have is how not only how many techniques there are, but like the overlap, the names. Somebody say, it's Meisner based, but it's also Feldenkrais.
So funny. I know. It's like bet you must have heard of everything under the sun. You must have heard every technique and teacher and guru and class and
some of them I'm like, well, that sounds kind of the same. That sounds the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds like a cult.
Yeah, exactly. But whatever helps.
I agree.
I am curious, in the time since, up until today, you mentioned, your sort of approach has changed slightly. I'm curious how technique process focused of an actor you are. Are you the type of person who thinks about how they're doing something while they're doing it? Are you someone who is very aware of what your approach is, or is it kind of change with the role, with the project, with the director?
I try to remain really flexible and try to keep it, not ephemeral is not the right word, but to just have elasticity with it and flexibility so you can change on a dime. And I had a great analogy once of like acting sort of like handing the keys over to someone else to drive. And that's like a very general sort of metaphor, but I quite like that. And I find the more that I can do physically, the less I get in my head. And then the less I'm in my head, the less self-conscious I am. And I find that always freeing. But each project varies different, so wildly in terms of what's required and the atmosphere on set. And to be honest, I can't create a performance until I'm there and you feel what's in the air and the other actors in front of you. And you can have all your ideas and do your prep and conversations, but until you're there and you're in it, you don't know. And it's and then even after that, you're like, I'm often like, oh, that's what it was about. And I have regrets or I'll hang ups and, I screwed that up or this and that. So yeah, it feels like the longer I do it, the more I just really want to remain flexible, try lots of things. And for me, I feel like that is more fun and is more potential.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that, that mindset has contributed to the great range of your career and like who you are as an actor? Because you look at your IMDb page and it is drama, it is horror, it is comedy, it is and you excel at all of them. And I'm curious, if you have a certain mindset that has allowed you to just go from project to project and different environment and excel in all of them.
Oh well, I don't know that, but I
take it from me.
I honestly, this is such a cheesy thing. I feel like it's luck. I just feel like I know so many great actors who don't get enough work, and you know what I mean. I just always feel so lucky. I feel really grateful and lucky, and one thing can lead to another, and work begets work, and those sorts of things are really true. I've definitely tried to have a say in my career, and often those choices are what you say no to, not what you say yes to. Mm-hmm. It's like those things can shape your career just as much as anything else. And I had a strong desire to do comedy, and I really hadn't. I'd done mainly dramas up until later in my 20s. And that was something I pursued very specifically because I wanted to break out of just being kind of in these heavy dramas. And I knew, that was something I consciously pursued for sure within my career. And I was really grateful, and again got lucky that someone took a chance on, this dramatic actress on a TV show, Damages. I was known for that at that point in the States. So again, I felt very lucky.
Yeah,
someone takes a chance on you, whether it's a theater director who sees you even though you didn't graduate from drama school, or the comedy director who'll see you even though all they've seen you on is like a drama on a cable show.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that intangible luck factor is I've done, I think, almost 50 episodes of this podcast at this point. I've heard of people's careers, and the takeaway is you cannot chart a career. You cannot plan it. There's no blueprint. And so much of it is somebody opening a door.
Yep. Somebody opening a door, having that moment, making a choice, whether it's yes or no, and what that then leads to. Yeah. It's all those things that are intangible. Yeah. As you said.
I'm curious about, the importance of the things you say no to. I that's really interesting to hear. And I'm just curious, how one can go about, thinking about the things they don't do and what the approach is to what is worth it at any point in your career.
Well, I think, having a family really fundamentally changed my choices, as it does with many people. But I think becoming a mother, that was a huge turning point of like just priorities. And whereas before I was, probably less discerning than I should be. And then I think becoming a parent, I've just, by natural consequences, have started to be a little choosier and a little more confident in saying no. Not that things I always think my last job is going to be my last job. Like, I'm as insecure as the next actor. But definitely having kids, I think, reprioritized my time. You just have less time, and there's other precious things going on.
We just had Ayo Idibiri on the podcast. She's in the Bear, and she was talking. She said something really fascinating. And she was saying, how important the in between times, doing human things, walking your dog. She was saying, if you don't do that, there's nothing to pull from in the well. You don't want to give up your reserves. And I found that really interesting, and it's interesting to hear you kind of echo it. The when you're younger and you have the time, you can work, but it's almost like once you find the beauty of those other priorities, your career almost reaches the next level where you're like, oh, I can pick and choose what is worth my time.
Look, ideally. I mean, sometimes you can also have a family and like be broke and like really want to get a job. Like I'm always so glass half empty, but I know in my situation, I definitely chose to slow down a little bit more. And, like this business, you do one thing and it might be successful. So then you get projects coming your way that are all just the same or really similar. Mm-hmm. So it's like I got, every ensemble female comedy coming my way after Bridesmaids or something like that. Bridesmaids. But so it's also knowing when that's pretty obvious and like, okay, I'll be okay if I don't. But I find it very hard, I should say, to say no. I do not take that lightly. Like I find it really excruciating. I feel bad. I'm like, I've had to get tougher. I've had to get a thicker skin of like, it's okay to say no. I've had so many no's in my life from people.
Yeah. The memory of when you were begging for a yes,
Yes, exactly. Or still trying to get in, knock on doors for certain directors and things and getting a no. It doesn't change. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because this year alone, you have several projects and they are very different. And, I do want to talk first about Platonic.
Yes,
And I wanted to read a quote from the co-creator, Nicholas Stoller, who said you are the most game actor he's ever worked with. I'm curious from your perspective what that means. What does it mean to be a game actor?
Game. Okay, yeah. I'm trying to think of what I did on set. But we're like, well, I'll try everything. I'm very like throw it all at the wall, and then they can tell me to pull back a little bit or go further a little bit. But I think with comedy, you always have to, kind of go for it, go be game and go for it and dive in the deep end. And then you'll know where the tone is, of like where the joke kind of lies a little bit. So maybe he's referring to that, but I'm trying to think what I did.
Well, it sounds like you were willing to do anything.
Yeah, God, for better or worse.
I was going to ask about, the physical comedy of the show. It is a showcase for your talents as a physical comedian, as somebody who's great at nonverbal acting and just getting things across. I have to assume that's something you've worked very hard at. That's something you have, through trial and error and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, being game for anything, basically. So I'm curious how you're still. And to use Platonic as an example, how you're still working at that, what is there anything on Platonic that you found, was stretching a comedy muscle or trying something new that you have not tried before?
Well, Nick Stoller gave me my break in comedy. He cast me in Get Into the Greek. because another actress had to drop out of that part. So there was like a window, and I got to audition, and it was like, again, luck, this girl couldn't do it. I got in, it was like total luck. And so then now cut to Platonic, which is, 15 years later or something. And Francesca, his wife, and him, they really just wrote to me and Seth and wrote to our strengths, and particularly once we started, and so they gave me all those opportunities to do the funny physical stuff, which they know or could see that I, would have fun doing. So I'm so indebted to them, because they were the ones who kind of set us up, and can see they just write to our strengths so well, and particularly having done the Neighbours movies with him too. It's like collective years of work of kind of getting to this point of being able to, and I may have asked to, like, said, I'd love to, and if I did, maybe in rehearsals, I think I mentioned, that would be good, or yeah, that's a great sequence, I love that. But they're really smart, and they know, he knows what's going to work for each actor, I felt when I started to see the scripts come in, I was a little bit daunted, but I thought I wouldn't screw it up.
There are, there's the sort of large scale pieces that are very clearly, doing ketamine, they're a thing. But there's so many small moments that I think I'd love to know what is behind it, because it sort of illuminates the process. There's a second of a moment in episode 5 where Seth Rogen throws you a beer, and it just kind of like bounces off your hand. And
that really happened.
I was going to say, the reaction is so...
that really happened.
It's so funny, because it's literally like half a second. I was like, what is that something you did multiple times, or did that really happen?
I think it really happened, and then we had to recreate it again and again and again. I think that's what happened, is that I missed it, and then it was like, holy shit, we have to do this again and again and again. If I'm correct in my memory, I feel like that's what happened to me. It would kept losing the beer under the props, and but that was one of those spontaneous things, which is so fun and funny when you're doing it. Yeah, that was one of those, which was which was really, and I think Seth and I, having worked together many times now, there's a real camaraderie and an ease that you have with one another, because you've broken the ice a little bit. And it was funny in this show, because we're not playing husband and wife like in the Neighbours movies. So halfway, early on in the first few weeks, I turned to him and I was like, "You're being like really mean to me this time. Like, you're not as nice. Like, you were so sweet last time." Because they're playing these, like, obviously much more kind of a different, kind of not a hostile friendship, but like a bit of a combative friendship they have.
Well, I am curious, because again, we talk to a lot of people in this podcast and get a million different answers about a million different subjects, because that's what acting is. But one of the most, different answers we get is about the concept of chemistry and, what it means. It's an interesting scenario here, because not only have you worked with Seth multiple times, but it is a very specific type of chemistry you have on this show. It is platonic. It is a chemistry you don't get a lot on screen. So I'm curious, your thoughts on what chemistry means. Is it real? Is it just acting? Is it something you can build, or is it something that just is a result of acting?
I am as fascinated as you are on those questions. I truly am. I think it's like lightning in a bottle. Like, I do. I see actors on screen or on stage, and I'm like, wow, the chemistry, and they could very well like hate each other. Or, it's so ephemeral. You could really get along with someone and then have no chemistry on stage or screen with them. It's so intangible. It's like this, it's like particularly on camera, I think, because it's something that happens between the lens and the real thing, and it just translates. And I am always I think we're all chasing it, right? Every job, we're all chasing that chemistry that you have with people. And if it translates as well, that's the big thing. But famously, didn't the actors not get along on the X-Files? Weren't they like famously like never talking to one another or whatever? And like you hear that story, and you're like, wow, like, and they were fantastic as Scully and Mulder. I mean, I remember reading that in some article. I don't know those actors, but
allegedly,
allegedly. So with Platonic, it really lived and died on that chemistry of those two. So that's why I really went after Seth, and asked Nick and Francesca early on if if he would want to do it, because without that, it just wouldn't have worked at all. It would have been no show.
Yeah,
but I could talk about chemistry all day. I don't know. What have you heard of the interviews you've done? Like,
I had a very eye-opening experience, I think, oh my God, almost a year ago, when we had Ethan Hawke and Ewan McGregor on the podcast, and I asked them about chemistry, and they both were like, it's not like, we don't even like the the term. They said they don't even believe in it. They said, and I was, I was like, oh no, I really stepped in it here, because they were the same way. They were very passionate about it. And they said, occasionally it can feel a little insulting because you're kind of getting rid of the fact that it's acting, that they're putting on performance. You're sort of saying, oh, these people must get along, when really maybe they don't. So the fact, just to hear somebody, in my whole life, I've talked about chemistry on screen. It's been something but to hear actors say, oh, we don't even think it's real, it's fascinating. And so after that, I've loved talking to other actors about it, because again, people are like, oh, of course it's real. And other people agree.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's a really interesting take that
it is just acting,
It is just acting, yeah.
You can work with you can have good chemistry with someone you don't like.
Yeah,
basically.
Or with a cup of coffee, you could have good chemistry or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's
a good point, yeah.
Is acting not just, pretending to believably displaying something on screen, whether that's liking your co-star
or not, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You can have bad chemistry with a person you really like. It's fascinating, and you're right. We could talk about it.
We could devote the whole.
We could just make this the chemistry cast.
The chemistry cast, exactly.
But I did want to also ask about physical, because it's such a different character. It's such a different process, and the thing I find so interesting about that show and your performance is that sort of divide between Sheila's outside and her inside. There's the idea of this inner monologue. I'm curious, throughout all 2 seasons, and now there's the 3rd season, as a performer, how you've approached that in the moment. When you're performing a scene where there will be voiceover that you record later, and what she's doing in the moment is different from what she's thinking. How do you bring that together when the director says action?
It was definitely trial and error. It was a technical challenge to have that, and my double on the show, Kelly, she would read out all the lines.
Interesting.
And it was, I mean, it's also quite funny because it's so harsh and like aggressive. And so we'd yell cut, and everyone would just be like, all right.
Jeez.
Lighten up, Sheila. So there was a levity afterwards, just to keep it's like releasing the gas valve. So it was a little bit, the tension would get out of the room. But I love the voiceover. It's such a weird technical challenge. And in season 3, they really changed with the device of that, in that it turns sort of Zooey Deschanel's character kind of starts out as sort of an innocent kind of obsession or interest, curiosity that Sheila has, and then turns into a far more kind of dangerous situation, but for her mentally. But also really the voiceover was something we did in the post-production. So, on set I would do it, and it was like, we had Kelly doing it in the room. But then the real work became in the post-production, and I'm one of those rare actors. I love ADR, I love fixing it, I love looping, I love trying to change it. And so it was like the final sort of texture of the show, the final layer would be the voiceover. And Annie was always tweaking it. So it was always getting changed and always being tweaking. And I could adjust the voiceover to the performance too. So once I would see the performance, and we could like figure out where the voiceover would sit, where the inner voice would sit.
Mm-hmm. The technical challenges is something else I'm very obsessed with when it comes to on-camera acting, because you have that. And also I've noticed, in physical, how often the camera is directly in front of Sheila. So I've always interested in that sort of split mind thing that actors do, where it's, you have the VO, you have what you're doing, and then there's a camera directly in front of you.
Yeah.
What is the way that you've found to sort of navigate all of that, and also releasing it and making it a real moment in front of the camera?
Again, like, I did a soap opera in Australia when I was a teenager, and that was honestly such a technical lesson. I did it only for a year. I was really young. I was 15. But that taught me so much about just everything, camera angles. And I've just feel like it was such good training in that sense as a young actor, to get that into my, just to learn it, just to learn, and learn the dynamics of the set and the responsibilities and the roles, but just all of that stuff that really only comes with practice. And I felt like, it's another thing as a performer is always to see how far you've come, and to look back instead of we're always constantly looking to the next and the next, and to sort of it's also important to just like look over your shoulder now and then and go, hey, you know, you have come a long way. Look how far you've come in terms of that. And so something like physical was a really technical watershed moment for me, I think, for those sorts of reasons of like what was required, particularly how it was shot, you know, with all these raking close-ups and never looking at the other actor ever.
Yeah.
And, you know, like the best performances, I think when I'm watching a performance, it always feels like they might not be possibly in control of what they're doing. And that is really interesting. Instead of being self-conscious, it feels like someone else is driving the car. And that's a bit exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm. What is the thing about, you know, acting, your career, that you're still most curious about? What is the thing that you're still, you know, still sort of trying to answer or trying to do or trying to understand about this thing that you've been doing for all these years? What is the biggest curiosity about acting these days?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think to stay curious is really important. I think the minute that you're not, then you should probably not going to be doing very interesting work, perhaps. And I think to keep that curiosity alive and to your point, to your actor you were interviewing before, to keep your life alive, you know, to have as much of a rich life as you do in real life, not just in your work. And I just do have an endless curiosity. Yeah, I never think I've arrived in any sense of the word, in any concept of that meaning, whether it's creatively like completely fulfilled or whatever. It always feels like a constant journey and a constant journey of inspiration too. Like when I finally now go back to the theater all the time and being back in that magic of being in the stage in the audience, looking and having that unique moment every night that you're never going to have again for those actors on stage until they do it again, and it'll be different. Those sorts of inspirations, I think. And I think after the pandemic, it's been a real rediscovery of all that. And missing that creative outlet. So yeah, I think as long as the curiosity ever leaves, that's when, and I'm still remained utterly curious.
I love that. Well, Rose, thank you again.
Thank you.
This was wonderful. And
thank you.
Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage. Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Casey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In The Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.